Family, there are moments in life when we don't turn away from God with a loud rebellion. No, sometimes it happens softly, quietly, almost unnoticed. It's the slow drift of the heart, the gentle fade of passion, the silent widening of a gap we never meant to create. You don't wake up one morning and say, I'm far from God. Instead, you feel it. An emptiness where there used to be fire, a distance where there used to be closeness, a whisper instead of the voice that once guided your every step. Subtle nature of spiritual drift is one of the most delicate and often overlooked experiences in a person's walk with God. Unlike sudden moments of crisis or obvious rebellion, this kind of drifting happens quietly in small increments through overlooked habits, unattended emotions, and unnoticed shifts in priorities. It is the gradual pulling away of the heart, so gentle that you rarely recognize it while it is happening. Instead of a dramatic decision to run from God, it is a quiet settling, a slow loosening of your grip on the things that once anchored your spirit. You may still believe, still love God, still speak His name, yet something inside begins to weaken, soften, and dim. This subtle drift can be likened to a boat at sea that is not intentionally rowing anywhere. Even without movement, the tides and winds slowly carry it away, inch by inch, until one day the shore is barely visible. The heart functions in much the same way. When it is not actively oriented toward God, intentionally seeking Him, and consciously aligning with His presence, it begins to drift by default. This drift often begins with small compromises that do not seem harmful on their own. Perhaps it starts with skipping prayer once or twice because life feels busy. Maybe it's choosing distraction over quiet time, or convincing yourself that you will reconnect with God when things calm down. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself it's nothing. But spiritual drift rarely begins with loud sin. It begins with quiet neglect. A neglected flame does not extinguish instantly. It flickers, dims, struggles, until one day you notice it has become only a faint glow. That is how spiritual distance settles in, softly, silently over time. Another subtle aspect of drifting is how it often disguises itself as normal life. You may still attend church, still say the right words, still do the right things, yet internally feel less connected than you used to. It's possible to be present in body but distant in spirit. You can sing worship songs with your mouth while your heart remains unmoved. You can hear scripture without feeling stirred. You can surround yourself with spiritual environments and still feel like a stranger in them. This internal shift is not always visible to others, and sometimes not even clear to you at first, because it does not announce itself. It hides in the margins of your routines, gradually seeping into the spaces that once belonged to God. This subtle drift is also fueled by the busyness and noise of modern life. When schedules fill up, when responsibilities increase, when mental and emotional energy is stretched thin, the first thing many people unintentionally let go of is the intimacy they once had with God, not because they no longer care, but because the world's noise grows louder than God's whisper. Drift thrives in distraction. It thrives in exhaustion. It thrives in overcrowded minds that once had room for stillness. You might not notice the shift right away because nothing collapsed, nothing broke, everything continues to function outwardly, yet inwardly, the quiet separation begins to take shape. In many cases, spiritual drift also begins with emotional wounds or disappointments that go unaddressed. A prayer you felt went unanswered, a season of hardship that made you question where God was, a relationship that hurt you, leaving you unsure of how God fits into the pain. Instead of confronting these feelings with honesty and vulnerability, you move on, burying them under responsibilities or distractions. But buried emotions do not dissolve. They create distance. You begin to trust God a little less, rely on Him a little less, believe a little less deeply, not out of anger, but out of hurt that was never healed. This is why drift is often emotional before it becomes behavioral. The heart pulls back before the habits do. There is also a subtle shift in desire that happens when the soul begins to drift. Things of God that once felt sweet or necessary may begin to feel optional or less satisfying. You may still know they matter, but the hunger diminishes. What once drew you powerfully now draws you softly, then softly becomes rarely, then rarely becomes hardly at all. You may not notice the fading desire at first because you still believe, still love God, still respect His word, but love without desire loses its fire. It becomes routine instead of relationship, duty instead of devotion. This slow erosion of longing is one of the clearest signs of drift, yet also one of the most easily ignored because it doesn't feel like rebellion. It simply feels like tiredness, like numbness, like life. Perhaps the quietest part of spiritual drift is how you begin to tolerate distance that would have once broken your heart. There was a time when missing a moment with God felt like missing breath, when going a day without prayer felt impossible, when you longed for His presence with a kind of urgency. But in the drift, that urgency fades. You become accustomed to spiritual emptiness. You normalize dryness. You learn to live without the closeness you once had. And because the change happens slowly, you don't recognize how far your heart has wandered from the place it used to rest so easily. The inner emptiness that grows when distance from God increases is not always sudden or dramatic. It often unfolds quietly, gradually, and subtly, like a slow leak in the soul. At first, you might not even notice anything is wrong. Life continues. You move through your days, complete your tasks, talk to people, laugh, work, rest. Everything seems normal on the surface. But beneath that surface, something begins to shift. The fullness you once carried, the peace, the clarity, the sense of divine nearness begins to feel less steady, less vibrant, less alive. It is not that God has withdrawn Himself. Rather, the heart that once leaned into His presence begins leaning into other things. And when the heart leans away from its source, emptiness quietly takes its place. This emptiness often begins as a faint hollowness, a small sense that something is missing. You may not know how to describe it, but you feel it. A quiet ache, a low-level restlessness, a subtle discontent that lingers even in moments that should bring joy. You might achieve a goal, celebrate a milestone, or enjoy a good moment with loved ones, yet something inside feels incomplete. That's because the soul was never designed to function well without connection to its Creator. When that connection weakens, the soul feels the loss deeply, even if the mind doesn't fully understand it. The result is an inner void that nothing else seems to fill. As distance from God increases, the soul begins to search for substitutes, something to quiet the ache, something to fill the growing space. Some people turn to busyness, hoping that constant movement will drown out the emptiness. Others turn to entertainment, distraction, or even relationships, hoping that someone or something can provide what their spirit is silently craving. But no matter how much the world offers, nothing fully satisfies the void left by spiritual disconnection. You can fill your schedule, fill your mind, fill your home, fill your hands, and still feel unfilled. That is because emptiness of the soul cannot be fixed with external things. It requires a return to the one who made the soul. This emptiness also expresses itself as a loss of inner peace. You may find yourself feeling more anxious, more unsettled, more overwhelmed by things that would not have shaken you before. When you walk closely with God, His peace acted like a shield around your heart, calming storms before they overtook you. But when that closeness fades, the storms feel louder, stronger, and more draining. You may start reacting more quickly, worrying more intensely, or feeling more emotionally exhausted. Not because life has necessarily gotten harder, but because the spiritual strength that once supported you feels weakened. Peace is harder to access when you've drifted from the source of peace. Another way this emptiness grows is through a diminishing sense of purpose. When God feels distant, life often feels directionless. You may still know what your goals are, still know what your responsibilities are, but the deeper why feels blurred. You may find yourself questioning your decisions, second-guessing your path, or feeling like you're moving without progress. Purpose becomes cloudy when connection to God becomes thin because purpose is rooted in alignment with Him. Without that alignment, even success can feel strangely empty. Achievement, don't feel fulfilling. Progress doesn't feel meaningful. You begin to realize that purpose without God becomes motion without meaning. This growing emptiness can even affect relationships. When the soul is disconnected from God, it often struggles to love others with depth, patience, or compassion. You may become more irritable, more guarded, more easily offended. You may find it harder to forgive or to extend grace. That's because the love you were receiving from God, love that once overflowed through you, is not flowing as freely, and when it does not flow in, it becomes harder for it to flow out. The emptiness creates emotional fatigue that makes relationships feel heavier than they used to. The kindness that once came naturally now feels like effort. The joy that once energized your interactions begins to fade. An even deeper sign of this emptiness is the loss of spiritual hunger. When distance from God grows, the desire for Him often weakens. It becomes harder to pray, harder to worship, harder to engage with Scripture, not because you don't care, but because the heart becomes numb. And this numbness is one of the most painful forms of emptiness, a silence where there used to be passion, a stillness where there used to be fire. You may feel like you're going through motions without truly connecting, like you're spiritually present but emotionally absent. It's a lonely feeling, a quiet ache that is hard to articulate, because it feels like losing a part of yourself you didn't mean to let go of. At times, this emptiness becomes a sense of inner dryness, as though the well of your spirit has run low. You may feel less inspired, less motivated, less spiritually alive. Things that once stirred your soul now leave you unmoved. Moments that once felt sacred now feel ordinary. This dryness is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of need. It is the soul's way of saying, I am thirsty for God. But if this thirst is ignored, the emptiness grows deeper, making life feel heavier, colder, and increasingly disconnected from the warmth of God's presence. In the deepest layers of this emptiness, there is often a quiet loneliness. Even when surrounded by people, even when life appears full, the heart feels a sense of aloneness that cannot be explained. It is not social loneliness, it is spiritual loneliness. It is the soul missing the nearness of God. This kind of loneliness is subtle but powerful. It makes everything else feel insufficient because the heart knows something fundamental is missing. Something vital, something eternal. The longing in the soul that calls us back to divine closeness often begins as a quiet murmur, a whisper deep inside, soft and gentle, nearly drowned out by the noise of daily life, yet unmistakably there. Beneath the bustle of responsibilities, the weight of routines, and the pull of worldly concerns, the soul remembers. It remembers a time when every breath carried the fragrance of God's presence, when each moment felt sacred, and when the heart beat in rhythm with the divine. Even if we have drifted, even if the distance has grown, that longing doesn't vanish. It lingers, like an ember that refuses to die, waiting for us to lean in, to breathe again, to allow its warmth to draw us home. That longing often surfaces in unexpected moments in the hush of early morning before the world wakes. When everything is still and you catch a glimpse of sky or feel a chill breeze, there is a stirring, a subtle ache. It might come as a memory of prayer, a recollection of worship, or a fleeting thought, I used to feel this close. Or it may stir in the midst of turmoil, grief, regret, confusion, when the heart realizes its own weakness and longs for the one whose strength never fails. It might even arise in joy, the odor of a child, a song, the beauty of creation. Something touches the soul and the longing rises, unbidden, unscheduled, undeniable. It does not announce itself. It simply shows up in the emptiness, in the unrest, in the quiet, calling gently, persistently, urgently. This longing is not a demand or accusation. It is an invitation. It does not shame, it beckons. In its tenderness lies compassion, a reminder that the soul was made for communion, for union, for closeness. When we hear it, we realize that all the things we've chased to fill us, the busyness, the distractions, the comforts, were but shadows compared to the reality we once knew. And this recognition does not come with fear, but with hope. It awakens in us a desire to stop settling for substitutes and to seek the source who alone satisfies. It reminds us we were never meant for distant faith, half-hearted devotion, or dusty rituals. We were made to walk in the light of intimacy, to live in the glory of closeness. That longing is sacred because it is honest. It reveals what the heart truly wants when all the masks are stripped away. As we begin to respond to that longing, the soul becomes more alert. Silent corners once ignored begin to feel like holy ground. A glance at the sky overhead, a pause in the day, a breath of stillness. Suddenly those become opportunities. The longing stirs our spirit to wonder, to question, to reach. Maybe we start to whisper again, faint words, half-formed prayers, hesitant confessions. Maybe we begin to search the horizon of our heart for the lost rhythm of communion. We might not find the fullness immediately. The drift may have caused rust, stiffness, silence. Yet the longing remains, and when we lean toward it, even with trembling hands, it begins to soften the rough edges. It begins to remind the heart how to breathe, how to thirst, how to hope. The beauty of that longing is that it does not demand perfection before we return. It simply welcomes our return with open arms, soft footsteps, and gentle compassion. It knows our weakness, our failures, our broken places, yet it does not recoil. It beckons us anyway. That is the grace hidden in longing, the soul's open doorway back to God, even when we feel our hands are too dirty, our hearts too stained, our faith too fragile. The longing says, "You are still mine, come back." And it invites us not with condemnation, but with kindness, not with expectation, but with acceptance. It draws us closer, not by forcing us, but by awakening in us the hunger that only closeness can satisfy. In the journey of rediscovery, this longing often becomes a companion, subtle, humble, but unwavering. It reminds us during the mundane, the household chores, the work, the errands, that we are not merely living tasks, we are living souls. It stirs in the night when we feel exhausted, empty, worn out, whispering that life is more than this cycle of doing and resting, that there is a deeper identity beyond the daily grind. It pulls us gently toward silence, toward vulnerability, toward honesty. It invites us to kneel, to breathe, to open the door. And when we allow ourselves to lean in, the soul begins to remember what it meant to feel loved, cherished, held. The longing becomes a bridge, fragile yet true, between where we are and where we belong, between the drifting heart and the heart of God. Self-reflection and spiritual honesty are some of the most transformative experiences in a believer's journey, yet they are often the most uncomfortable. This kind of reflection is not simply thinking about your life or evaluating your behavior. It is a deeper turning inward, a willingness to look at the hidden corners of the heart and acknowledge what has been ignored, denied, or suppressed. It is the practice of pausing long enough to ask real questions and brave enough to hear real answers. Many people avoid self-reflection because they fear what they might uncover. But spiritual honesty is not meant to shame us. It is meant to free us. It is the light that reveals truth, the mirror that shows reality, the doorway that leads back to intimacy with God. This honesty begins with recognizing that drifting away from God rarely happens with loud declarations or dramatic scions. It begins in the quiet, the subtle, the overlooked, without honest reflection. It's easy to tell ourselves that we're fine, that nothing is wrong, that the distance we feel is temporary or unrelated to our spiritual state. We blame stress, work, people, and circumstances, never stopping long enough to ask if the real issue is the condition of our soul. Self-reflection allows us to shift from excuses to truth, from denial to clarity. It asks questions like, when was the last time I truly felt close to God? Why do my prayers feel empty? What have I been avoiding? What has taken priority in my heart? These questions are not accusations, they're invitations to understanding, and understanding is the first step toward healing. Spiritual honesty also requires acknowledging our internal conflicts. It is possible to love God deeply, yet feel numb. It is possible to want closeness, yet avoid the very things that build it. It is possible to desire transformation, yet hold tightly to habits that hinder growth. These contradictions do not make us failures, they make us human. But without honesty, these contradictions create confusion and distance. When we refuse to confront them, they shape our spiritual life without our awareness. But when we name them, when we say, I feel distant, or I'm not as committed as I used to be, or I've allowed other things to take God's place, we reclaim authority over our spiritual direction. Honesty breaks the power of confusion and gives us the clarity to choose a different path. Another reason self-reflection is essential is because it reveals patterns. Every heart has patterns, patterns of thinking, reacting, avoiding, and coping. Some patterns lead us closer to God, while others pull us away. Without reflection, we remain blind to these patterns and trapped in their cycles. We may find ourselves drifting again and again, wondering why nothing changes. But reflection exposes these cycles. It shows us the moments we tend to disconnect, the triggers that lead to silence, the habits that drain our spiritual energy. It reveals how we respond under stress, what we turn to for comfort, and which voices we allow to guide us. Through reflection, we begin to see the threads connecting our daily choices to our spiritual state. That awareness gives us the power to interrupt unhealthy patterns and cultivate new life-giving ones. Spiritual honesty also challenges the masks we wear. Many believers learn to perform spirituality, to appear strong, stable, secure, and faithful, even when the heart feels dry or distant. We nod, smile, say the right phrases, and carry the right posture, all while our soul quietly aches. We fear being judged, misunderstood, or seen as weak. But real honesty requires dropping the mask, at least with God and with ourselves. Pretending does not bring healing. Pretending does not bring restoration. God cannot heal a version of us we pretend to be. When we come before Him with our true condition, messy, tired, conflicted, or confused, we create space for Him to meet us as we are, not as we perform. The mask may fool people, but it cannot heal the heart. Honesty can. Another crucial part of self-reflection is recognizing where we have allowed distractions to take priority. Sometimes we drift not because of sin, but because of noise. The demands of life grow louder than the whisper of the Spirit. We fill our minds with information, our schedules with tasks, our hearts with worries. Spiritual honesty means admitting when our focus has shifted. It means asking, what have I been giving my attention to? What has taken the space that God once occupied? These questions open our eyes to the subtle ways the world has crowded out the sacred. They remind us that intimacy with God requires intentionality, not leftovers. They call us to reorder our priorities and create space for what truly matters. Self-reflection also brings us face to face with our needs. Many people walk through life ignoring the deep needs of their soul, needs for peace, guidance, forgiveness, purpose, connection, rest. When we don't acknowledge these needs, we try to meet them through shallow or temporary means. But reflection forces us to ask, what is my soul craving? What wound in me needs God's touch? What fear or burden am I carrying alone? These questions allow us to come honestly before God with our emptiness instead of pretending we're full. They allow us to seek the nourishment our soul truly longs for instead of distracting ourselves with things that never satisfy. Finally, self-reflection and honesty prepare the heart for return. They soften the soil, break the hardness, open the door. When we look inward without fear and acknowledge the truth of where we stand, we create space for God to move. We position ourselves to receive guidance, correction, comfort, and renewal. Reflection is not about dwelling on guilt. It is about creating clarity. It clears the fog. It reveals the path. It realigns the heart. Without honesty, we cannot return. Without reflection, we cannot change. Through self-reflection, we realize not only how far we've drifted, but also how deeply God desires to draw us back. The reassurance that God's presence remains constant even when we waver is one of the most comforting truths a drifting heart can rediscover. It is easy to believe that when we feel distant, God must be distant too. That when our passion fades, His love must fade with it. That when we stop pursuing Him, He must stop pursuing us. But the nature of God is not like human nature. Human affection shifts. Human commitment weakens. Human attention wanders. God's does not. His presence is steady, unwavering, unchanging, even when we are inconsistent. This constancy is not earned by flawless devotion. It is rooted in His character, His love, and His covenant. Because He is faithful, His presence remains faithful. Because He is love, His love remains steadfast. Because He is unchanging, His closeness is not affected by the fluctuations of our spiritual state. When we drift, we often assume that God must be far away because that is how we feel. But feelings are not accurate indicators of divine proximity. Our feelings may tell us God is silent, distant, or absent, yet the truth remains that He is near. Sometimes the distance we sense is not His withdrawal, but the quietness of our own spirit. Sometimes the silence we perceive is not His absence, but the noise within us that has grown too loud to hear Him. Sometimes the void we feel is not God leaving, but our heart slowly turning its attention elsewhere. Yet even in that, He does not abandon us. He remains present, patient, and available, gently waiting for the moment our heart turns back, even slightly toward Him. This reassurance becomes even more powerful when we consider how consistently God has shown His nearness throughout our lives, even in moments when we were unaware of it. There were times we were protected without realizing it, guided without acknowledging it, strengthened without asking for it. God's presence has always been a quiet backdrop to our story, whether or not we were consciously aware of Him. When we drift, that same presence does not disappear. It simply waits for recognition. God does not force Himself upon us, yet He never removes Himself from us. His presence is a steady, gentle invitation, Not loud, not demanding, but constant. One of the most comforting truths about God's presence is that it is not dependent on our performance. Many people feel unworthy of returning to closeness because leave their mistakes have disqualified them. They think they have gone too far, drifted too long, or sinned too deeply for God to still remain nearby. But God's presence does not operate on merit. It is not a reward for good behavior or lost when we fail. It is a gift rooted in divine love. The very moments we feel the least deserving are often the moments He is nearest, ready to restore what has been weakened and revive what has grown cold. Our failures do not push Him away. Rather, they reveal how committed He is to staying with us through every season. The assurance of God's constant presence also shifts how we interpret spiritual dryness or distance. Instead of seeing it as abandonment, we can learn to see it as invitation. When God feels distant, it often means He is calling us deeper, urging us to seek Him with fresh desire, rather than relying on past emotions or memories. His nearness is not always felt, but it is always real. Even when the heart feels numb or disconnected, His presence surrounds us. Even when prayer feels weak or empty, He hears every word. Even when worship feels mechanical, He draws near. Feelings fluctuate, but God does not. This constant presence is also what makes returning to Him possible. If He withdrew when we drifted, we would have no way back. But because He remains, the path to restoration is never long or complicated. It begins with a single turning of the heart, a single whisper of desire, a single moment of honesty. The closeness we lost slowly is often restored quickly, because God never left in the first place. The moment we open our heart even slightly, His presence floods back into our awareness, not because it returned, but because we finally noticed it again. The breakthrough comes not from God moving toward us, but from us finally recognizing how near He's always been. Another powerful aspect of God's constant presence is that it protects us even while we drift. We may not realize it, but there are dangers we avoided, temptations we resisted, and decisions we were guided through simply because God stayed near. His presence is not only comfort, it is protection. Even in seasons of wandering, He surrounds us with grace, intervenes in ways we don't see, and gently redirects us when we unknowingly veer too far. This kind of faithfulness is not something we earn, it is something He gives. It is His nature to stay close, even when we do not. The reassurance of His unchanging presence also gives us hope. When we drift, the guilt and shame can feel overwhelming. It is easy to believe that the journey back will be long, or that God is disappointed or weary of our inconsistency. But His constant presence means He is always ready to restore, always ready to receive, always ready to renew. He is not surprised by our weaknesses or disheartened by our struggles. His love is not fragile. His commitment is not shaken. His patience is not exhausted. He remains the same whether we are strong or weak, devoted or distracted, burning with passion or barely holding on. In truth, the constancy of God's presence is the anchor that keeps us from drifting beyond His reach. Even when we loosen our grip, He does not loosen His. Even when we wander, He watches over us. Even when our heart grows cold, His heart remains warm toward us. His presence is the quiet safety that surrounds every moment of our life, calling us back, drawing us near, and reminding us that no matter how far we feel, we are never truly far from Him. The invitation to return, reconnect, and realign with God's purpose is one of the most profound acts of grace a drifting soul can encounter. It is not an invitation wrapped in pressure or disappointment, but one wrapped in love, patience, and deep understanding. God does not call us back with accusations about how far we've wandered or how long we've drifted. He calls us with the gentle assurance that His door has never closed, that His heart has never turned cold, and that His purpose for our life remains intact, even if we lost sight of it. This invitation is the quiet knocking at the door of the heart, the soft tug on the spirit, the reminder that no matter where we have been, we still have a place with Him. This invitation begins the moment we recognize our drift. Awareness awakens desire, and desire awakens movement. Even the smallest turning of the heart is enough to begin a journey back towards spiritual closeness. Sometimes this turning is hesitant, filled with fear or uncertainty. Sometimes it is bold and immediate. But the form of the return is not nearly as important as the direction. God does not measure how gracefully we come back, only that we do. He responds not to perfection, but to sincerity. When the heart whispers, "I want to return," heaven responds with open arms. The process of reconnecting often begins with rediscovering intimacy, not rituals, not performance, intimacy, the quiet moments where you allow yourself to feel again, to speak again, to listen again. It may start with simple prayers, soft words spoken in honesty, not eloquence. It might begin with opening Scripture again, even if the words feel unfamiliar or distant. It might begin with stillness, with silence, with the willingness to sit in God's presence, even if you do not feel anything right away. Reconnection often requires rebuilding sensitivity, like waking up numb hands that slowly regain feeling. Little by little, the heart becomes responsive again. Little by little, the soul begins to warm. Little by little, spiritual strength returns. As we reconnect with God, something else begins to happen: clarity. Distance clouds the mind, but closeness clears it. Things that felt confusing begin to make sense. The chaos within begins to settle. The questions that tormented the heart lose their power. When we drift, life becomes noisy, directionless, fragmented. But when we return to God, His voice begins to realign what has been scattered. Old anxieties loosen their grip. Old habits lose their appeal. Old wounds begin to heal. The soul finds rest in the presence it had forgotten. Clarity is one of the first signs that reconnection is taking root. Realignment with God's purpose is the natural next step after reconnection. Many people believe they must figure out their purpose before returning to God, but the opposite is true. Purpose flows from relationship. When the soul reconnects to the one who created it, direction begins to emerge. Realignment is not about forcing yourself into new behaviors. It is about rediscovering the path God always intended for you. It is about remembering why you were created, what your heart was shaped for, what your spirit longs to accomplish. Purpose does not appear in the noise of distance, but in the quiet of closeness. And as you draw near again, you begin to walk differently, think differently, choose differently. God's desires start to feel like your desires. His direction starts to feel like your direction. The drift is reversed not by effort, but by alignment. This invitation to realign is never harsh. It does not come with condemnation. Instead, it comes with a sense of hope, an internal knowing that life can be different, more meaningful, more whole. Realignment means returning to the priorities that once shaped you: peace over pressure, holiness over hurry, obedience over impulse, presence over performance. It means choosing what nourishes your soul instead of what numb. It means allowing God to reorder your steps, rearrange your motives, and refine your desires. It is not a one-time step, but a continual posture of openness, a willingness to let God lead. One of the most beautiful parts of this invitation is that God does not ask us to return in our own strength. He empowers the return. He strengthens the steps. He gives grace for the process. He knows that drifting has weakened us, that distance has tired us, that emptiness has drained us. So He meets us exactly where we are. If all we can offer is a whisper of a prayer, He receives it. If all we can offer is a single moment of stillness, He honors it. If all we can offer is a tired heart longing for closeness, He delights in it. God does not require the version of us we used to be. He simply invites the version of us we are now. As we accept this invitation, transformation begins, slowly at first, then steadily. The drift stops. The distance closes. The emptiness fills. The heart grows soft again. The soul regains its hunger. The fire rekindles. What once felt impossible begins to feel natural. What once seemed lost begins to return. God never intended for us to live separated from Him. And when we come back, everything in our life begins to realign with a deeper sense of meaning, identity, and peace. The invitation to return, reconnect, and realign is the evidence of God's relentless love. Love that does not give up when we grow weary. Love that does not fade when we lose focus. Love that does not retreat even when we drift far from where we began. It is a standing invitation, extended every day and every season, waiting patiently for the moment our heart responds.